Like Elsie said, we're going to talk about early visual development and specifically with how to promote visual engagement. So my name is Karen Harpster. I'm an associate professor through the Department of Pediatrics and Patient Services Research. I'm also a faculty mentor for the LEND program and an occupational therapist. So the objectives today, we have two objectives. The first is to identify signs of impaired early visual development and describe functional implications of impaired visual engagement. So when we think about children who might be in this phase of early visual development, there are certain things that we might hear from parents when kids are starting to learn to use their vision. They might say that their child does not open her eyes for long periods of time, or might keep her head down at night before bed. My son's eyes open and he looks at the nightlight to see the door where the light is coming in, but he doesn't open his eyes much during the day. Another parent said it was sad. I had to look at all these toys that he has and he doesn't play with them. And another parent mentioned that her son's teacher says that he cries at daycare and will sit with his head down playing with 2 to 3 toys, and she's concerned. So just to review some challenges that you might notice when you're working with a child who might be in this phase of visual development. One thing is they're not very visually curious. So when you bring them into a room, they might not be looking around if it's a new environment. They might only have a couple of toys that they like to play with, but if they get like a new toy for their birthday, they're not really interested in that toy. Some kids might look but not reach, so there might be limited reaching for toys or engaging with toys. Some kids will bring things to a close distance or bring their face up close to a toy, but have a harder time seeing things that are farther away. They might be interested in toys that light up, that are bright in color, or that have a lot of moving parts. And sometimes there might just be a delay in between when you show the child a toy or an object and when they'll actually look at it. So there's some things that we can do to help support a child in this phase. The first would be thinking about positioning. So a lot of the slides you'll see on the left are the easier positions, and on the right are the harder positions. So if we want a child to engage in a visual toy, like the person on the left with the slinky, we want to keep the child fully supported so they're not having to work really hard on their posture and their head control while they're looking at the toy. In the middle, you'll see a little bit less support, so the child's sitting upright, but engaging down in a book. And on the child on the right is having to work the hardest in controlling their posture while playing with the toy. So if you have a child who's in that early stage of visual development, we want to keep them as supported as possible. Some other things that we can do to support vision are use their preferences. So if they have a favorite color or a favorite kind of toy, use that toy to their advantage. So if we want them to, for example, look at the Elmo toy and reach for it, I would use something that they're very familiar with versus something that's new or a little bit more complex. If we work with their vision in the familiar environment, so where they're used to the surroundings, that would make it easier. And then using toys and people that they're familiar with. Thinking about less is more. So it's really hard because a lot of baby toys or younger kid toys have a lot of detail to them. So a lot of colors, a lot of things going on. But for children who are just using their vision for the first time or in the beginning stages, using something that's less complex is easier for the child. So some goals that we might, come on, I forgot this is, okay, some goals that we might think about for a child who is in this early phase is turning on their visual system. We'll talk about these in the next couple of slides. The next might be to increase interaction with toys, utensils, or cups, and just building a positive experience while using vision. So the first thing would be turning on their vision. So we might do this in a way that we might build fixations by doing things in the environment. So some things that we can do to support the child's vision is to turn off all the other senses. So if the TV's on or there's a lot of activity, we might go to a quieter room or turn off the TV. If dinner's cooking, that might be hard and pull their vision away from what they're trying to look at. So using a quiet room with limited talking, trying not to overdo things like cologne or perfume, and limiting the amount of touch that you give to the child while they're trying to use their vision would be helpful. Another thing that we might want to think about is the clutter in the room. So if you're in a room that has a lot of background things, it might be a toy box, a toy shelf, turning their vision away from that would be helpful. Or another strategy that we use would be putting up a black trifold in front of the clutter so that it puts a black background between the toy that you're asking them to look at and the busyness of the background. Or another idea would be just to turn them around to the corner of the room to reduce the visual clutter. Minimizing competing auditory information. Again, instead of, we talk a lot during therapy. So instead of talking a lot, just giving them quiet waiting time to use their vision can be helpful. And then again, using light, color, and movement to help promote looking is always helpful. So this is the idea of a little room. They look different depending on how you make them, but some parents swear by them. So if you have a little tent or a little trifold or some kind of room that you can make the child, it eliminates the busyness of the everyday environment, so they can kind of hang out in there and just use their vision in a quiet, small space. Another way to clear the clutter would be just to use some black material on the floor or some black felt on a busy like bookshelf or toy shelf or something like that. Turning off the lights and dimming the room could be also helpful. So here's just some examples of some real life pictures of children in their spaces that have some decreased clutter, black backgrounds to make it easier for them to use their vision. Some more examples. One thing we don't think about a lot, especially in home environments, is like busy rugs. So if the child's laying on their belly and there's a busy rug underneath them and toys on top of that, that might be hard for the child to see the toy. So instead, thinking about throwing down a black blanket or a mat to make it a little bit less clutter for the child. Using light to help the child turn on the vision can be helpful. I'll play this video here. The child is doing a shape sorter, but instead of using the whole shape sorting box, putting the shape sorter top on a light can sometimes be helpful. Using a desk lamp behind the child can be helpful, or a flashlight to help point out the toy that you're wanting the child to look at or reach for. Here are just some examples of some common toys that we use. Some of the toys are not toys. We make them ourselves from just materials from like the Dollar Tree or something like that. But trying to use things that have light or bright colors are often helpful in this phase. Another thing to think about is starting with the child's preferred color if they have one, and then building their looking behaviors and progressing to more colors as they're able. So if their favorite color is red, you might start with something simple like the ball and then add in a toy like Elmo that has red plus his orange nose and his white eyes. Thinking about mealtime interventions, a way to use color to help turn on their vision is using like a light up spoon, like you can see in the top right corner there. The other thing sometimes we do is we get those finger lights that we can put on a spoon. So it's not an adapted spoon, but just a finger light with a spoon with a finger light on it can be helpful. Putting just something like a bow that you might wrap a gift with on the end of a spoon or fork to help bring their attention to it, or a bow on a bottle to help them understand like where to put their hands when they're holding the bottle. And then if they're working on feeding themselves, using a solid color plate that hopefully would contrast the color of the food that's on the plate would make it easier for them to see the food. Here's some ideas of single color objects. Again, I feel like this is one of the hardest things because a lot of toys that are out there commercially for babies have a lot of different colors. So sometimes it's being creative with the toys that you can find for the child to reach for, look at, or grab for. So the toys on the right for a child who needed single color toys would be really hard for them to see. There's a lot of multicolored things there. So on the left, you have some ideas. The pinwheel is nice because it's shiny and reflective. So the way that the light hits it might make it easier for the child to see. Plus, if you blow on it, it'll move, and that movement will pull their attention to the toy. The pumpkin strings, it's just an example. I like to use a lot of things that are long. So if a child doesn't have a lot of motor skills, if it's hard for them to reach for the toy, they can see it up by their eyes and feel it by their hands. So that makes it easier for them to see and reach for. And they might, not intentionally touch the toy, and then eventually that non-incidental touch will turn into directed touch. Some ideas to turn on their vision using movement. So it can be something that physically moves, like the car in the middle or the mylar balloons on the right-hand side. The way that the light hits it, even if they're not physically moving, then it appears like it's moving with the shininess. Some things we can use, a lot of times you see kids with CVI reaching for pom-poms. Or if you just physically move the pom-pom or the balloon back and forth, that can be helpful to capture the child's visual attention. Here's just some more activities, and specifically if we can put some things near the child or the baby's regular area, so the changing table, giving them something to look at, or close to where they play, just things that can enhance their visual attention while they're in different spots in their house would be helpful. Here's some just some ideas that we use a lot with reflective. So again, with reflective toys, the way that the light hits them, even if they're not physically moving, it may appear like they're moving. So that can be helpful to target visual attention for children at this stage. A lot of times the lower visual field is harder for children with CVI to see into. So we can do things to bring materials up into their higher visual field to make it easier for them to see. So the example on the bottom right, just placing the child on their back and putting toys above them, or using creative solutions to get toys to hang down in front of the child so that it can be easily seen and they don't have to look into the lower visual field to see it. Some ideas to increase interaction with items. So for a child who might be in therapy, you might use their preferred color first and then start to use more colors. Eventually, our goal would be for them to look at all colors. So if we had a child who was not reaching it for toys, the first goal might be just for them to look at a one color item, for example, a pom-pom. And then our next goal, once they're doing that consistently, we might have them look at 3 to 4 color items of some kind of multicolor toy or multicolor pom-pom. Then we would expect them to interact with that. So then once they're looking at one color and then multicolors, then we might have them interact with or reach for or hold a multicolor toy. So this is just a visual. I'll give you this little video here. Oh, it flipped upside down. I don't know how that happened. Let's see if we start it again. Oh, can I turn that? Have you ever seen that happen before? Okay. So we might have to look at this creatively, but you can see this little girl, and she has a really extended wait time. So she's looking at the toy, and the original video was much longer. I did cut it down so you weren't staring at her, just staring at the toy for a long time. But if we give her some time here, she'll eventually reach for the toy. I apologize if that's upside down. I've never seen that happen before. I know this feels awkward waiting, but in their therapy sessions, it can sometimes be awkward while you're giving them that time to process. She's thinking about touching it. That would be close. She eventually touches and grabs it, the toy. And that was about a little over a minute. So just knowing that sometimes kids with CVI just need that time to sit and wait and process, which again, purposely, I played the video because it can feel really awkward. Another thing our next goal might be to increase interaction with toys. So as the kids are then starting to look a little bit more, that's when we would expect them to interact. So if they're looking pretty consistently, we can add complexity to the environment. Similar items or toys with fewer visual support that helps us know that their vision is getting better and their processing is getting better. The last thing that was on the list was to build a positive experience with children when they're learning to use their vision. So one thing, we just have to, make it fun and tranquil, so that they feel peace in using their vision. Encourage them or tap them with, like, tapping their arm versus saying, look at it, look at it. That verbal can sometimes be hard for children with CVI. So using touch or something else, or even tapping the beads up there to kind of promote vision, than constant talking. Allowing interactions to be child-led and very natural can be helpful. So kind of following the child's lead versus the therapist putting the intention into the activity. So some example goals that we might have with, for example, play skills. First, we have to think about what defines play for that child. And that can be different depending on if there's any comorbidities with the child. Knowing their preferences can help us adjust the environment in order to support their vision. So if it's a child that needs light, and we might darken the overhead light so that the light up toy is easier to see. We have to think about the positioning of the child. So how can we support their position in a way to enhance their vision, using objects that they're familiar with. I think sometimes as therapists, we want to bring new toys out at every session, but for children with CVI, that can be hard. So having a couple of toys that we use consistently can make it easier for them to use their vision. And then when we do introduce new toys, then introduce toys that have some of the preferred qualities, and that can vary for the child, but a lot of times it's movement and light. If we're working on a child with their sitting balance, we might adapt the environment to decrease the visual input, which can be overwhelming and fatiguing. So we might, if we want them to work a lot on their posture, we're going to turn the lights off or down, and then we're going to turn the child facing a black wall rather than the busyness of the room to make it easier to see what it is at their visual target. We want to use consistent treatment spaces if possible, so not bringing them to a different room at every session. Or if you're in their home, then using the same space in their home to make it easier. Use toys that are familiar and motivating. So a light up toy, something, if they're working on posture, we want it to be really easy for them to see. So they can, the vision part of the activity can be easy, and let's make the posture part the hard part. Allowing them time to process the toy before we're adding in the motor demand. So we might start with them a little bit supported and then pull the support away as they're getting used to it, and then minimize talking and any kind of additional noises within the environment. So now we'll go ahead. I think I have a minute to answer any questions before we start with the case study. If anybody has any questions, you can come off mute and ask, or I don't know if there's anything in the chat.
Jeanette had one in the chat.
Yeah.
So other than making educated guesses based on context or what you know about the child, how would you determine if they're still processing the visual information versus disinterested in the presented item?
So, I mean, I think I would look at that over time. So I would, look at their reaction to it, to whatever it is. And we'll say it's an Elmo toy. I don't know. It's easier with an example. So if we have an Elmo toy, we're showing it to them and they're not paying attention at all. If I think about an Elmo toy, it doesn't light up. So I might bring a flashlight to shine the flashlight on to see if that changes their interest in the toy to make it easier to see. And if that does change it, then I would go with that. If that doesn't change it, if I'm showing them Elmo because I think they like the color red, I might find a red light up something that they might be interested in and lower the lights to see. So it's kind of like, it's trial and error. But at the same time, every time you try something, you're looking at their visual behaviors to see how long they're. So what I would be counting is how long did it take them to look at the toy that I showed them, and then how long did they engage with the toy, and then kind of go from there. And I would kind of play around with it till I found something that they visually engage with for a second or 2 seconds, and then I would kind of look for that time to increase over time. Hopefully that's helpful. It's hard with a non-example out of space. So I'm looking at visual engagement. I'm counting how long they're engaging, how quickly they engage. And then if I change that item and make it easier to see or harder to see, I'm always taking data, if that makes sense. I'm counting how long they're engaging, how quickly they engaged, and then kind of make a decision from there. Do you have anything to add? Okay. Any other questions in the?
No, try.
Okay. Go ahead and say it now. I think my speaker was off.
I just had a question about kind of like the the positive reinforcement that you were doing with her hands. So when we're like maybe working on a lower level of skill, so those kids where we're just trying to work on like the visual attention to a toy, will you I think a lot of our kids, when they don't have a lot of movement, they're still learning cause and effect too, just because they can't interact with their environment or the world around them. So when you're working on kind of like moving eyes to a toy or visual attention to a toy, will you, like if they are able to look at it, will you kind of positively reinforce by maybe bringing the toy to them and letting them engage with it? Or do we kind of, is the attention to the toy and being able to see it its own reinforcement of what we're asking them to do? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I would say the first part of that. So I would definitely help them get the reinforcement that a child without motor dysfunction would do. So it's fun to look at a toy, but you don't really get the full experience. So that's why I kind of help her shake the bell, and she really loved that. So even though she can't shake it at this point by herself, looking at it and reaching for it, then I help her do that. Sorry for the confusion with my speaker. Okay, there's another one here. I'm gonna pull that over here. You're working on both vision and gross motor skills. Which one would you start with during a session? So so I would do one or the other, and maybe both in a session, but not both at the same time. So if I'm working on, I personally would probably start with vision first. So if I was working, I'd get their visual system kind of up and running and make the room dark and give them something really easy to look at. And then I might keep the room in that same, once I start to get some visual attention, I would keep the room in that setting. Because if she's working then really hard on gross motor, so if you want her to roll towards something, if she can't see the thing that's exciting to roll towards, she's not going to roll. So if we could turn on their vision and get them to see the object that she really loves, then I would set her up for like, to roll towards it once we have our visual system like kind of up and going. Otherwise, we might set her up for failure because we want her to roll, but there's no motivation to roll because she can't see the toy. So that's what I would do. I don't know, Elsie, if you would do anything differently. She's shaking her head. Yes, that's what she would do. So I would turn on their vision first and then keep the environment really easy and then work on gross motor. That's a great question. Oh, okay. How do you recommend modifying early mobility with someone with CPI? For example, with a gait trainer. Again, I would probably put something, so if I had somebody in a gait trainer, I would put something up on like a table so that it was at eye level, so that it's like right in their direct line of vision. I would put it close. So the proximity, I would make it close. Potentially, again, this is all without knowing the background of the child. These are all like where it'd start. I'd have a dimmed environment with a light up toy, probably something. Well, you could try both, something that made noise and something that didn't make noise, because some kids can look and listen at the same time and some kids can't. So I would kind of get a feel for that. So they would be the principles that I would start out with. It would be at their eye level. So it would be on a table or something higher so they don't have to look down. It would be dimmed environment, something really easy to see and something that they're motivated by. If it's a toy that they're motivated by that doesn't light up, I would put a flashlight on it or a desk light on the toy so that it's highlighted so that they have some motivation to move towards.